Hi, it's Phil McCauley here, Labour Business TV. Welcome, Stephen Kinnock, Shadow
Hello.
Minister for Asia and Pacific. Congratulations on your new role, Stephen. How's it going?
Thank you very much, Phil. Yeah, it's going really well, actually. It's great to be part of a fantastic team led by Lisa and Andy. And we've got really great colleagues dealing with other regions in the world. What a challenge it is to be dealing with Asia and Pacific. Somebody said the other day, I'm Shadow Minister for half the world. So,
well, congratulations. It's quite a portfolio.
I'm a bit daunted by that, but nevertheless inspired as well to make sure that we have a really coherent and cohesive foreign policy and policy, particularly for Asia and Pacific going forward.
Well, it's going to be important, of course, isn't it, as we try and get the world to return to some form of trade and we go past this awful COVID period. I mean, what's been the effect in your own constituency, first of all? What have you noticed on the ground in terms of jobs, furlough, that kind of thing?
Well, the biggest concern for my constituency, of course, is the steel industry. We have the biggest steelworks in the country, 4,000 men and women employed there, thousands more through the supply chain. And we've seen an abject failure of the government to support the industry yet again. I mean, we've been calling for support from the government for nigh on 10 years now. But what we've seen in this crisis is a complete failure to mobilize the coronavirus business interruption loan schemes for the steelworks. It's such a big business, it just doesn't work to have a cap on the loan. The government has been leading us a merry dance on what is required in order to get a loan that's going to work for the steel industry. And I'm afraid that if we don't get a liquidity injection very, very soon, then I'm afraid we start moving into an existential crisis for our steel industry. And what the government's failing to recognize here is the cost of doing nothing is astronomical. The cost of decommissioning a steelworks runs into hundreds of millions, if not billions. And you've also got the massive cost of making thousands of relatively well-paid workers unemployed in an area which, my goodness, does not need more unemployment. So huge challenges, and I'm very, very concerned about the situation.
So there needs to be a significant amount of state intervention at this point, just to shore up that position. Is there any chance that the Chancellor will look at that seriously, do you think?
Well, as I say, we're being led a merry dance. Tata Steel has clearly put forward its needs and the proposal for getting a loan, and I emphasize the word loan. This is not taxpayers' money that goes permanently into the steel industry. They'll be legally obliged to pay it back over a period of time, as with all the other interventions that the government has made in terms of liquidity support. So unfortunately, we're now being ping-ponged between the business department and Treasury. Nobody seems to want to make a decision. Government is paralyzed on this, and with every day that goes past, the risks to our industry become greater, and I think we are now in a very dangerous position.
It's interesting too that we've seen the Bank of England refuse to comment in particular on the kind of funding they are making available to some of the more favoured companies, it seems, and there's a lot of secrecy, it seems, going on at that level. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think we shouldn't be picking winners at all. What we should be doing is supporting every industry in the best way that we possibly can, because the cost of doing nothing is far greater than the cost of providing support. But what I would say about the steel industry, if you are going to prioritise, you really should be prioritising the steel industry, because it's a foundation industry. It's the backbone of British manufacturing. The cars we drive, the offices we work in, the homes we live in, the trains that we ride on, even the cutlery that we use for eating our meals, it is all based on steel. And if your steel industry collapses, it has massive implications for the economic and national security of your country. So I would be putting steel right at the top of the list of which industries are most in need of and deserving of support.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too, because the government is hoping to use infrastructure as one means out of this extraordinary, calamitous global recession that we're now already in. that's going to be important in your constituency, but it's going to be important to the whole country as we come towards the end of the transition period into the unknown charter territory of what happens after this whole Brexit transition. What's your sense of that in terms of your own constituency?
Well, absolutely. There can be no post-pandemic recovery without a strong and healthy steel industry, because if you don't have a strong and healthy steel industry, you don't have a strong and healthy manufacturing sector. And my goodness, surely the lesson of the last 30 to 40 years must be that if you allow your manufacturing sector to collapse, which is in effect what's happened in this country, you know, in the 1970s, 30% of our GDP was in manufacturing. It's now only 9%. And that, I think, is a fundamental problem, not just for your economy and in terms of the balance between manufacturing and services, but also the massive regional disparities that you see. You know, the gap between London and the southeast, and which is the richest region in the country, and the poorest regions such as South Wales, where my constituency is, or for example, the northeast. That is the largest gap in the entire industrialized world. The United Kingdom is the most regionally unequal country in the entire industrialized world. And with this coronavirus crisis, there's a huge risk that that will be an accelerator, a catalyst for deepening those gaps and widening them even further. So if you don't prioritize building up your manufacturing sector, you're going to be in serious trouble, and there won't be a post-pandemic recovery that can actually do this famous levelling up the government talks about. And infrastructure is at the heart of that. You'll never close the gap, the regional inequalities, unless you have infrastructure that is actually connecting the country, connecting our small industrial and post-industrial towns with the cities, providing work and opportunities that people can easily access. So I think infrastructure is key, but when we do have those infrastructure projects, let's make sure they're built with British steel. We have an extraordinarily bad record on government procurement, where the government doesn't consider local value and ends up just going to the cheapest bidder. Often then you end up with large infrastructure projects using Chinese steel or Turkish steel or Ukrainian steel. And that is the case right across our supply chains. So we need an infrastructure policy, but we also need a procurement policy that actually maximizes the share of the market for British products.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, turning to the coronavirus epidemic itself, what's been the impact on your own constituency? What kind of stories are you hearing on the doorstep and from people who are in touch with your office?
Well, it's heartbreaking stories in many ways. You know, I'm dealing with small-scale retailers on the high street who, you know, are not having the easiest time, massively hit already by the growth of the internet and a range of other issues that is hitting our high streets in small towns right across Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom, and helping them really with getting business rates holidays, getting access to loans both from the UK government and the Welsh government. We're of course seeing major challenges in terms of our elderly people and people in care homes, the disgraceful failure by the UK government to procure protective equipment for staff on the front line. We're dealing with a number of those issues. But I have to say, I'm also so heartened by the amazing way that the community has pulled together. We've got a number of volunteer schemes, street champion schemes, some of our local councillors doing, Labour councillors, I hasten to add, doing amazing work in terms of supporting some of the most vulnerable in our community. So I think we're seeing, if you like, some deeply troubling and grim things coming out of this crisis, but also some inspiring stories. And I just hope that we can take the best and carry that forward and learn lessons from some of the failings as well, and come out of this a stronger society and a stronger country.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Now, just finally, thinking about the very mixed messaging that we're all getting from the government, the confusion about the return to work or the not return to work, who can and who can't. What would your message be for the government, and in particular for those who are around the government and advising them? They seem to be all over the place.
Yeah, I think that there's a fundamental problem, because in a crisis like this, you need the state, but the country's being run by people who don't believe in a role for the state. You know, the Prime Minister's chief advisor, I think, is borderline anarchist. He has always had a view of Whitehall that let's go in, break things up, smash things up, throw things around. He has had a very antagonistic relationship with the civil service, constantly attacking them. You've got people in power who have actively been saying we've had enough of experts, you know, trying to sell people a fantasy. And we've had this kind of fantasy politics in our country for a very long time. And the current Prime Minister is one of the primary exponents of that, and Dominic Cummings is chief advisor as well. So I really worry that there's a sort of structural and cultural problem in terms of understanding what you need to do to make the state work for the rest of the country, the partnership between the state and the market and society, so that we really are all in this together and we move forward together. And that sort of attitude has then filtered through to, first of all, the complacency that we saw at the start of all this, and then I think to the lack of clarity that we're now seeing. And you know, bluff and bluster just don't cut it in a situation like this. You need calm, rational, compassionate, and evidence-based politics and leadership. And I really hope that we'll start to see more of that in the coming weeks.
Well, Stephen, thank you for your compassionate leadership in your own constituency and nationally and internationally for the Labour Party. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.